Margaret Caldwell is a retired Army colonel, disciplined, observant, and silently formidable. Her daughter Vanessa is a corporate executive who persuaded her to move in temporarily after a minor health scare, then quickly relegated her to the converted attic of the historic family estate. This is the story of how Margaret discovered her daughter's plan to sell the property out from under her, reclaimed her rightful place, and reminded her family exactly whose name was on the deed they took for granted. It's a quiet reclaiming of respect from a veteran dishonored. Not with confrontation, but with strategy. Wait, before we go any further, I got to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. She invited me for Christmas dinner, but served it to me on a TV tray upstairs. By evening, the grand dining table was set for 12. Polished silver gleamed under the chandelier that had hung in that room since 1943, when my father installed it as a homecoming gift to my mother. A centerpiece of red roses and pine branches dominated the middle, professionally arranged, nothing like the humble decorations I once crafted with Vanessa when she was small. The old house smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon, the same scents that had filled it for 78 Christmases before this one. I'd helped prepare 46 of those dinners myself, rolling out pie crusts on the marble countertop my husband had installed before he deployed for the last time. But this year, I wasn't even invited to the kitchen. I sat in the attic room, listening to laughter drift upward through the heating vents. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone played the piano, poorly, on the Steinway in the drawing room. My grandchildren's voices carried, excited about presents and desserts. I wasn't new to isolation. I'd survived 3 tours in combat zones, a year, in a military hospital recovering from shrapnel wounds, and the lonely decades after my husband's death. But somehow, I'd thought family would be different. I stirred the cooling gravy on my plate, still untouched. When the silence in my room became too loud, I reached for my laptop not to distract myself. Not really, just habit. After 30 years of military intelligence work, observation was second nature. So was documentation. The login screen welcomed me to the family email account I'd established years ago. Welcome, Margaret. Last checked. December 20th. New messages. 3, my breath caught. Not fear, just a flicker of curiosity. I clicked on the first message. Subject line. Caldwell Estate Valuation. Sender. Wellington Realty Group. Dear Ms. Caldwell, as requested, we've completed the preliminary assessment of the property at 1873 Heritage Lane. Based on comparable sales in the area and the historical designation of the main house, we estimate market value between $3.2 to $3.7 million. As discussed, the zoning would permit subdivision into smaller parcels, though this would require navigating the historical preservation requirements. We're prepared to move forward with listing preparations after the holidays per your timeline. Regards, Thomas Wellington. I blinked. Then again. I knew Heritage Lane quite intimately. I'd grown up playing in its gardens, had watched my daughter take her first steps on its lawns, had scattered my husband's ashes beneath the oak tree by the pond. The address they referred to was this house. My house. And my daughter was planning to sell it. I scrolled to the next email. Subject: Estate planning options. From Vanessa to her husband, Richard. Rich had another talk with Mom's doctor today. Her mild cognitive decline might be the perfect reason to suggest she needs a more specialized living arrangement. Dr. Evans said he'd be willing to recommend assisted living if we felt it necessary. Once we move her, we can proceed with the sale. The market is hot right now, and we could use the money from her place to finally buy that vacation property in Colorado. The kids would love having a ski lodge. Let's discuss after the holidays when she's back in her room. She doesn't need to know until everything is arranged. I've already contacted 3 nice facilities outside the city. My stomach tightened. Not with panic, but with precision. The same tight, sharp feeling I used to get when intelligence reports. revealed a previously unidentified threat. I had no cognitive decline. I'd had a single episode of vertigo 3 months ago that had prompted Vanessa's sudden concern and insistence that I move in temporarily while they monitored my health. Within a week, I'd been relocated to the converted attic, my room at the opposite end of the house from the family's comings and goings. My suggestions about meal preparation were gently dismissed. My offers to help with the grandchildren were politely declined. My questions about household affairs were redirected. It wasn't the plan to sell my home that made my heart accelerate. It was the calculated deception, the dismissal of my agency, the assumption that my name, rank, and lifetime of command had suddenly become irrelevant. I opened the third email. It was from Richard to their financial advisor. Down payment. Options. The message outlined how they planned to leverage the proceeds from Margaret's estate to finance not only the Colorado property, but also to restructure their extensive debts. Debts I hadn't known existed. I stared at the screen. Somewhere below, someone laughed loudly. The sound of dessert plates being distributed clattered through the vents. My tea had gone cold on the bedside table. I pushed it away without looking. My thoughts raced. Not wild, but precise. Not panic. Assessment. They had miscalculated badly. In their eagerness to solve their financial problems with my property, they'd overlooked something fundamental. Something they should have checked before formulating this plan. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the County Property Records website. I entered the property ID number I knew by heart and waited as the record loaded. There it was. Owner of record, Margaret A. Caldwell. Sole owner. Not joint with Vanessa as she perhaps assumed. Not held in a trust that named her as beneficiary. Just my name, clear and unencumbered. I had never added Vanessa to the deed, despite her occasional hints over the years. My husband and I had purchased this property with his military pension and my combat pay. We'd restored it room by room, shingle by shingle, with our own hands during the brief periods when neither of us was deployed. The property tax bills came to me. The insurance was in my name. The historical designation had been my project after retirement. Vanessa had grown up here, yes. She'd brought her husband here to live temporarily after college while they saved for their own place. That temporary arrangement had stretched to 5 years. Then they'd moved out, bought beyond their means elsewhere, and now apparently needed my property to rescue them from financial mismanagement. And they assumed, without checking the actual property records, that they could simply decide my future, shepherd me off to some facility, and cash in. I sat back in my chair, the screen blurring slightly as decades of tactical training clicked into place. I wouldn't cry. Not tonight. Not for this. Instead, I pulled my notebook from the drawer. Army issue, green cover, grid-lined paper. I'd kept one by my side through 3 decades of service. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote in my precise handwriting, Operation Homefront. I underlined it twice. Below, I listed the intelligence gathered, Vanessa and Richard planning unauthorized. Sale of my property solely in my name. Confirmed using doctor to create false narrative of decline timeline. After holidays motivation. Financial troubles. Vacation property acquisition currently unaware that I know. I tapped my pen twice against the paper, then reached again for the laptop. I needed more intelligence before formulating a complete response strategy. This wasn't about emotion. This was about facts, ownership, and respect. I navigated to their shared cloud storage, the one I'd set up for family photo sharing years ago. The one they'd apparently forgotten gave me full administrative access. I browsed through recent documents, finding a folder labeled Future Plans. Inside were spreadsheets detailing their current debt, substantial, their income, less than I'd thought, and multiple versions of financial projections based on estate sale proceeds. One document stood out. assistedlivingoptions.xlsx. I opened it. They'd researched 3 facilities, all at least an hour away from the family home, all described as adequate and within budget constraints. None had the gardens I'd cultivated. For decades, the library I'd assembled, or the privacy I valued. The most expensive option, the one they'd marked as lowest priority, had a modest veterans program. I downloaded the entire folder to my personal drive and continued my reconnaissance. Their text message backups revealed conversations with the real estate agent dating back 6 months, long before my episode of vertigo. This hadn't been opportunistic. It had been the plan all along. They'd just been waiting for a medical justification. My hand didn't shake as I documented each finding. I'd interrogated enemy combatants with steadier nerves than this. I'd made life-or-death decisions under artillery fire with less clarity than I felt now. A soft knock interrupted my concentration. I closed the laptop swiftly as the door opened. My youngest granddaughter, Emma, peeked in. "Grandma? Mom said to bring you some pie." She entered carrying a small plate with a sliver of pecan pie, not the pumpkin she knew I preferred. The portion was perhaps a third the size of what I'd glimpsed being served downstairs. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, accepting the plate. Emma lingered, glancing around the cramped space that had once been an attic storage room. "Why don't you come downstairs? Uncle David is telling funny stories." Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "Emma, I told you just to drop off the pie. Grandma gets tired easily, remember? She needs her rest." "I'm not tired at all," I said mildly. "I'd love to join everyone." Vanessa's smile tightened, at the edges. "Oh, but we're all about to leave for the holiday light display downtown. You wouldn't want to be out in the cold with your condition." "My condition?" I asked, voice neutral. "The vertigo, Mom. Remember how the doctor said to avoid overexertion?" What the doctor had actually said was to call if symptoms returned, which they hadn't. He'd recommended normal activity. I'd been a military physician's assistant before moving into intelligence. I knew when medical advice was being creatively reinterpreted. "Of course," I said, matching her false smile with one of my own. "You all go ahead." Emma hugged me quickly before being ushered out. Vanessa paused at the door. "We'll probably be late. Don't wait up." The door closed. Their footsteps receded down the narrow attic stairs. Minutes later, I heard cars starting in the driveway, then silence. I returned to my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Strategic Response, Phase 1. Below it, I outlined the initial steps of my counteroffensive. This would require precision, timing, and the element of surprise, all skills I'd spent a lifetime honing. By the time they returned from viewing holiday lights, I had completed my first reconnaissance and established my primary objectives. I had also sent 3 emails of my own, one to my longtime attorney, one to the family doctor asking for my complete medical records, and one to an old military colleague who now specialized in property law. The house creaked around me, familiar, sounds of an old structure settling. I'd heard these same creaks as a child hiding under blankets, as a young wife waiting for news from distant battlefields, as a widow learning to sleep alone. This house held my history in its beams and foundations. It knew who I was even if my daughter had forgotten. I set aside my laptop and pulled out an old photo album I kept beside my bed. In it was a photograph of my husband and me standing proudly in front of this house the day we purchased it. Both in uniform, both smiling, despite the work we knew lay ahead in restoring the then dilapidated property. On the back of the photo, in my husband's handwriting, Project Homestead Day 1. For Margaret and all the Caldwells to come. He'd died believing this place would shelter generations of our family, not be liquidated to cover our daughter's debts and fund a ski lodge. I returned the photo to its album and sat quietly in the darkness. The attic room was cold. They'd adjusted the heating to save energy. though I noticed the rest of the house remained perfectly comfortable. I pulled an old military blanket around my shoulders, the same one that had accompanied me through 3 wars. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing my strategy. Tonight, I would rest and remember who I was. Colonel Margaret Caldwell, retired, decorated combat veteran, sole owner of the property at 1873 Heritage Lane, and not yet ready to surrender. My daughter thought she was dealing with a diminished, old woman who could be managed into compliance. She had forgotten what 30 years of military strategic planning looked like in action. She had forgotten who had taught her to play chess, and why she had never won a game against me. She had forgotten, most critically, to check the property records before making plans for my home. That mistake would prove costly, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to remind her respect is earned, property is documented, and veterans don't retreat. We regroup. The system kept me waiting. So did she. The morning after Christmas dawned bright and cold, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow, like reconnaissance flares. I was awake before dawn. Military habits die hard. While the house remained silent, occupants sleeping off holiday excess, I dressed methodically. Not in the shapeless loungewear Vanessa had started purchasing for me, but in pressed slacks, a crisp blouse, and the cashmere sweater my late husband had given me on our last Christmas together. I made my bed with hospital corners, a practice from decades of barracks inspections. Then I opened my laptop and checked for responses to last night's communications. My attorney, James Harrington, had already replied. "Colonel, disturbing to hear about your situation. My office reopens tomorrow at 9 a.m. I've scheduled you for a 10 a.m. consultation. In the meantime, do not sign anything, regardless of how it's presented to you. Document everything." My military colleague, Catherine Winters, now a property law specialist, had also responded. "Maggie, your property documentation appears solid based on the records you forwarded. Don't engage directly about ownership until we've spoken. Will call at 0800 hours." The family doctor's office had sent an automated response promising to process my medical records request within 3 business days, though given holiday scheduling, delays were expected. I closed the laptop and moved to the small window that overlooked the back gardens. The greenhouse my husband and I had built was barely visible from this angle, half obscured by the roofline. Inside it were heirloom roses we'd cultivated for decades, descended from cuttings his grandmother had brought from England. Vanessa had mentioned casually last week that the greenhouse was probably not worth maintaining and took up space that could be better utilized. Now I understood why. In the subdivision plans I'd discovered in their digital files, the greenhouse occupied what would become Lot 3 of the proposed development. I watched as the sky brightened, casting long shadows across the property that had been in my family for 3 generations. The oak tree where my husband's ashes lay stood sentinel by the pond, branches etched against the winter sky. I wondered if Vanessa had even considered what would happen to that sacred spot in her development plans. At precisely 7 a.m., I left my attic room and descended the narrow stairs to the main house. The Christmas decorations, professionally installed the day after Thanksgiving, filled the hallways with a perfumed, artificial cheer. I walked past the imposing Christmas tree in the formal living room, its designer ornaments and coordinated ribbon a far cry from the mismatched treasures and handmade crafts that had decorated our trees when Vanessa was young. The kitchen was empty, so I started coffee brewing in the sophisticated machine Richard had insisted on installing when they moved in. Then I took down a simple mug, one of my own that had somehow escaped being packed away, and sat at the kitchen island to wait. Catherine called exactly at 8 a.m., military precision intact despite her civilian career. "Maggie, I've reviewed everything you sent. Your position is legally strong, but I'm concerned about their apparent discussions with your doctor. Have they approached you about power of attorney or any other legal documents regarding your care decisions?" "Not yet," I replied. "But based On their emails, that appears to be the next phase of their plan. Good that we're ahead of them then. I recommend a full neurological evaluation with an independent doctor, someone with no connection to your current physician. We need to establish definitively that you're fully competent. I have several colleagues who could expedite this given your military status. Arrange it, I said. And Catherine, thank you. This isn't how I expected to be spending the holidays. The honor is mine, Colonel. You pulled my unit out of that ambush in Kandahar. Helping you protect your home is the least I can do. We finished. R called just as I heard movement upstairs. Footsteps, a shower running, the sounds of the household awakening. I remained at the kitchen island, calmly sipping my coffee. Richard appeared first, dressed in expensive loungewear, hair still damp from his shower. He startled visibly when he saw me. "Margaret, you're up early." His voice held the carefully, modulated concern they'd all adopted recently when speaking to me, a tone pitched somewhere between addressing a child and humoring an invalid. "Old habits," I replied mildly. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." He poured himself a cup from the machine, adding the almond milk he preferred. "Did you sleep well? Those attic rooms can get drafty." "I've slept in worse conditions," I said, watching his expression. Forward operating bases rarely prioritize comfort. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face at the reminder of my military service. Richard had never served, had never experienced the disciplined discomfort of deployment. His world was corporate boardrooms and vacation properties, leverage and liquidity. Of course, he said hastily. "Still, we want you to be comfortable. Vanessa has been researching some really nice living options that might be better, suited to your needs." I nodded, expression neutral. I'd be interested to hear about those options. Relief flooded his features. They'd obviously expected resistance. "Great, she's got some brochures. Beautiful places, really, like resorts." "I'll look forward to seeing them," I said, finishing my coffee and rising. "Please tell Vanessa I've gone out for a while. I have an appointment." Alarm replaced his relief. "An appointment? Do you need a ride? I'm not sure you should be driving with your condition." "My friend is picking me up," I lied smoothly. "And I don't have a condition, Richard. I had one episode of vertigo 3 months ago, likely caused by an inner ear infection that has completely resolved." Before he could respond, I walked to the coat closet and removed my wool peacoat, another item that had somehow escaped being relocated to the attic. I could hear him fumbling for his phone as I stepped outside, undoubtedly texting Vanessa about this unexpected development. The cold air felt bracing after weeks of being treated like a hothouse flower, too delicate for normal conditions. I walked down the driveway and along the street, turning at the corner where Catherine had arranged for a car service to meet me. The driver was already waiting, an ex-military man himself based on the service sticker on his window and the precise way he opened the door for me. "Colonel Caldwell," he said with a nod of respect as he spotted the small pin on my coat lapel, a subtle indicator of rank recognized by those who had served. "Thank you for your promptness," I replied, settling into the back seat. "Where to, ma'am?" "Harrington and Associates, downtown office." He nodded and pulled away from the curb. Through the rear window, I could see Vanessa's SUV turning onto the street we'd just left, presumably coming to intercept me. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd planned it as a tactical maneuver. The law offices of Harrington and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building with views of both the city skyline and the river beyond. James Harrington had been my attorney for over 30 years, handling everything from my husband's estate to the historical designation application for the property. His assistant showed me directly to his office, where James rose from behind his desk to greet me, his handshake firm despite being well into his 70s. "Colonel," he said warmly, "happy to see you looking so well." "Thank you for making time during the holidays, James." He gestured for me to sit. "Your message concerned me. You've never been one for exaggeration, so I take it the situation with Vanessa is serious. It is. I removed my laptop from my bag and opened it to show him the emails I'd discovered. They're planning to declare me incompetent based on a single episode of Vertigo, move me to assisted living, and sell my property to cover their debts and purchase a vacation home. James read through the emails, his expression darkening. When he finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. This is deeply troubling, Margaret. Not just ethically, but potentially legally. If they've been misrepresenting your health to your doctor to build a case for incompetence, that crosses several lines. I intend to see an independent neurologist to establish my cognitive status definitively, I told him. Catherine Winters is arranging it. Excellent. Catherine's a good choice for this situation. He leaned back in his chair. What's your objective here, Margaret? Do you want to confront them directly? Seek legal remedies? Or something else entirely? I considered the question carefully. Despite everything, Vanessa was still my daughter. The grandchildren were innocent parties in this scenario. I want to secure my property and my autonomy, I said finally. I want them to understand that I am neither declining nor naive, but I don't want to destroy my relationship with my family. If it can be salvaged, James nodded thoughtfully. A measured approach, then. First, let's review your estate planning documents to ensure everything is in order. Then we'll discuss strategies for addressing Vanessa's misconceptions about both your health and her authority. We spent the next hour reviewing my will, advance directives, and property documentation. Everything was in order, with no legal vulnerabilities that Vanessa could exploit. I had been meticulous in my planning, something my military career had taught me the value of. Your position is legally unassailable, James confirmed. The property is solely in your name. Your will directs that it pass to Vanessa upon your death, but with specific conditions regarding its maintenance and use. Your advance healthcare directive names Catherine as your medical decision-maker, not Vanessa, a wise choice given current circumstances. What would you recommend as next steps? I asked. James considered. Documentation of your cognitive health is priority 1. After that's established, I suggest a formal family meeting here at my office. Having this discussion on neutral territory, with legal representation present, sends a clear message while keeping the interaction civil and fact-based. I agreed to this approach. James made several calls, expediting the neurological evaluation to that afternoon. By the time I left his office, I had appointments scheduled with both a neurologist and a geriatric specialist, followed by a family meeting with James in 3 days' time. As I exited the building, my phone was filled with missed calls and increasingly urgent text messages from Vanessa. Where are you? Why did you leave without telling anyone? We're worried sick. Please call immediately. We're considering calling the police if we don't hear from you soon. I typed a brief response. I'm fine. Had errands to run. Will return this evening. Her reply came instantly. You shouldn't be running errands alone. Tell me where you are and I'll come get you. I didn't respond. Instead, I directed my driver to take me to the neurologist's office for my 1 p.m. appointment. Dr. Eleanor Chen was a no-nonsense woman with impressive credentials both in her civilian practice and from her time serving at Walter Reed. She conducted a thorough evaluation, including cognitive testing, balance assessment, and a detailed review of my medical history. Colonel Caldwell, she said when we finished, I can state unequivocally that you show no signs of cognitive decline. Your mental acuity is exceptional for a person of any age, and your test results are consistent with someone decades younger. The vertigo episode you described appears to have been an isolated incident, likely viral in nature, with no lasting effects. I'd appreciate that in writing, Doctor, she nodded. I'll prepare a comprehensive report today. I understand the urgency, given your situation. My next stop was Dr. Marcus Williams, a geriatric specialist who conducted his own thorough evaluation. His conclusions matched Dr. Chen's. You're in remarkable health, Colonel Caldwell. Physically and cognitively, you're functioning at a level that puts you in the top percentile for your age group. I see no medical justification whatsoever for assisted living or any restriction of your independence. By late afternoon, I had written reports from both specialists confirming my cognitive competence and overall health. My driver took me back to the house as darkness was falling. The temperature had dropped further, and Christmas lights twinkled along the street, casting colorful reflections on the snow. Vanessa's car was in the driveway, along with an unfamiliar vehicle I soon recognized as belonging to Dr. Evans, our family physician. So they had escalated to bringing the doctor to the house. I found the timing almost amusing. They were a step behind at every turn. I entered the house to find Vanessa, Richard, and Dr. Evans seated in the living room. Their conversation stopped abruptly when I appeared in the doorway, still dressed in my professional attire, looking nothing like the confused elderly patient they had apparently been discussing. "Mom!" Vanessa jumped up. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick." "I had appointments," I said calmly, removing my coat. "What appointments?" Richard asked. "You didn't mention anything to us." "I wasn't aware I needed permission to manage my own schedule," I replied, my tone pleasant, but firm. I turned to the doctor. "Dr. Evans, this is unexpected. I don't recall scheduling a house call." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Vanessa was concerned when she couldn't reach you today. Given your recent health issues, she thought it prudent to have me check on you when you returned." "That's thoughtful, but unnecessary. I'm in excellent health, as confirmed today by both Dr. Eleanor Chen, neurologist, and Dr. Marcus Williams, geriatric specialist." I removed the medical reports from my bag and held them up. They were quite thorough. The silence that followed was profound. Vanessa's face had drained of color, while Richard suddenly found the carpet fascinating. Dr. Evans looked both surprised and slightly chagrined. "May I see those reports?" Dr. Evans asked finally. "Certainly. I'll have copies sent to your office. I've also requested my complete medical records from your practice, which I expect to receive within the next few days." Vanessa found her voice. "Mom, what is this about? Why are you seeing doctors we don't know about?" "I wanted independent evaluations," I said simply, "especially given the apparent concerns about my cognitive status that have been discussed with Dr. Evans without my knowledge or consent." Dr. Evans had the grace to look ashamed. "Colonel Caldwell, I hope you understand that any discussions were purely out of concern for your well-being." "Of course," I said, "though in the future, I'd prefer that concerns about my health be addressed with me directly, rather than through third parties. Military command taught me the value of clear communication chains." The reminder of my rank and background seemed to straighten the doctor's posture slightly. "Absolutely. I apologize if there's been any misunderstanding." Vanessa attempted to regain control of the situation. "Mom, we were just trying to help. After your vertigo episode, we've all been worried about you living alone in this big house." "I appreciate the concern," I said. "But I'm not living alone, am I? I'm living with you and Richard in the attic room you prepared for me." Richard cleared his throat. "It's a nice space. We converted it specially." "It's certainly adequate for temporary use," I agreed. "Though, as the medical reports confirm, there's no reason I can't return to my own bedroom." "Your bedroom?" Vanessa repeated, a note of panic entering her voice. "But we've turned that into Richard's home office. All your things are stored safely." "I see." I smiled pleasantly. "We'll need to reconsider that arrangement then, but we can discuss the details later. Dr. Evans, thank you for your concern, but as you can see, I'm perfectly fine." The doctor rose, clearly eager to extract himself from the increasingly tense family situation. "I'm glad to hear it. I'll look forward to receiving those specialist reports." He gathered his medical bag and nodded to Vanessa. "I'll see myself out." After he left, the three of us remained in an uncomfortable tableau. I broke the silence. I'm rather tired after my busy day. I think I'll retire early. Good night. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving them staring after me. As I climbed toward the attic room, I heard urgent whispers below, followed by the sound of Vanessa's phone dialing. I smiled to myself as I reached the top of the stairs. Phase 1 of Operation Homefront was complete. Intelligence gathered. Independent medical certification secured, legal counsel engaged. My position was established and documented. Phase 2 would begin tomorrow with the cataloging of my belongings and the systematic reclamation of my space within the house. Phase 3 would culminate in the family meeting at James's office, where all cards would be laid on the table. I entered the attic room and closed the door behind me, listening to the frantic conversation taking place below. My military training had taught me the value of preparation, the importance of securing one's position, and the power of controlled revelation. Vanessa had forgotten those lessons, if she'd ever truly absorbed them. She had put me in the attic and planned to put me away altogether. But she hadn't checked the property records, hadn't verified my medical status independently, and hadn't considered that a career military intelligence officer might notice when someone was constructing a narrative that didn't align with reality. Most importantly, she hadn't remembered that retreat and surrender are not the same thing. Sometimes you have to fall back to regroup before advancing again with clearer purpose and better intelligence. Tomorrow would bring another phase of operations. Tonight I would rest, secure in the knowledge that I had already shifted the balance of power. Not through confrontation, but through preparation and precision, the tools of a soldier who knows the terrain better than her opponents ever could. She arranged the meeting. I arranged the evidence. The morning after my medical evaluations, I awoke at 500 hours, as had been my custom throughout my military career. The house was still silent, the sky outside just beginning to lighten from black to deep blue. These early hours had always been my most productive, a time for planning, for preparation, for arranging the day's strategy before the chaos of action began. I dressed methodically in tailored slacks and a comfortable but professional sweater, attire that projected capability rather than the frailty they seemed determined to assign me. Then I opened my laptop and checked my secure email. As promised, both Dr. Chen and Dr. Williams had sent their official reports, comprehensive documents detailing their findings and conclusions. Both had been unequivocal. I was cognitively intact, physically capable, and fully competent to manage my own affairs. I forwarded the reports to James Harrington with a brief note. Documentation for our meeting. Please prepare copies for all parties. His response came minutes later, despite the early hour. Received. Excellent results, as expected. Meeting set for 2 p.m. tomorrow. Car service will collect you at 1:30 p.m. Do not inform family of transportation. Arrangements. Let them believe you need their assistance to attend. I smiled at the strategic thinking. James understood the value of controlling the narrative. By arriving independently, I would immediately establish a tone of self-sufficiency that would set the stage for the discussions to follow. At 0600, I began a systematic inventory of my belongings. When Vanessa had relocated me to the attic room, many of my possessions had mysteriously disappeared into storage, a term that proved conveniently vague whenever I inquired about specific items. Now, I needed to determine exactly what was missing and where it might be located. I started with a list in my military notebook. Personal documents, birth certificate, marriage license, military records, financial records, property, deeds, insurance policies, investment portfolios, military memorabilia, medals, commendations, unit photos, husband's personal effects, wedding ring, dog tags, letters, family heirlooms, grandmother's silver, grandfather's pocket watch. Personal wardrobe, professional attire, formal wear, jewelry. With my list prepared, I descended to the main house. The kitchen was still dark, so I started coffee brewing, then began a methodical search of the first floor, starting with what had once been my home office, but was now designated as a reading room, decorated in Vanessa's preferred coastal aesthetic. The heavy oak desk where I'd managed household affairs for decades was gone, replaced by a decorative console table that held artfully arranged books and ceramics. The filing cabinet that had contained our important documents was nowhere to be seen. The walls, once adorned with my husband's military commendations and our family photographs, now displayed abstract seascapes in muted blues and greens. I moved to the formal dining room next. The sideboard where my grandmother's silver had been stored stood empty, its drawers lined with fresh paper, but containing none of the inherited pieces that had graced our holiday tables for generations. The china cabinet held Vanessa's modern, white dinnerware rather than the heirloom set that had been a wedding gift from my husband's family. Room by room, I continued my reconnaissance, noting each missing item in my notebook with military precision. By the time I heard movement upstairs, Vanessa's children stirring for the day, I had confirmed that virtually all traces of my life and history had been systematically removed from the common areas of the house. The only question remaining was whether my belongings had been stored elsewhere on the property or disposed of entirely. I returned to the kitchen as Vanessa entered, dressed in expensive athleisure wear, hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. "Mom," she said, startled to find me already dressed and alert. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied, pouring myself a second cup of coffee. I was just refreshing my memory of the house layout. It's been some time since I've had full access to the main floors. Her expression flickered between concern and wariness. "You've always had access. We just thought the stairs might be difficult for you." "The specialists yesterday found no mobility issues that would prevent me from navigating stairs," I said, mildly. "In fact, they recommended regular activity, including stair climbing, to maintain my physical condition." Vanessa busied herself with the coffee machine, avoiding my gaze. "That's good news. We'll have to review those reports when you get them." "I already have them. Digital copies arrived this morning. I've forwarded them to James Harrington, who has scheduled a family meeting for tomorrow afternoon to discuss my living arrangements and the status of the property. The coffee mug in—" Vanessa's hand stilled halfway to her lips. "James Harrington? Your attorney? Why would you involve him in a family matter?" "Because it appears this particular family matter has legal implications," I replied evenly. "Particularly regarding property ownership and healthcare decisions." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Mom, we were just exploring options for your care. There's no need to get lawyers involved." "I think there is," I countered, keeping my tone pleasant, but firm. "Especially given the conversations you've been having with realtors about selling this property." The color drained from her face. "How did you—" "Colonel Margaret Caldwell, United States Army, retired," I reminded her. 30 years. In military intelligence teaches you how to gather information effectively. For a moment, Vanessa looked like the little girl who had been caught drawing on the walls with permanent markers, a mixture of defiance and dismay that took me back decades. But she quickly recovered, her expression hardening into something more calculated. "We were looking into options that would benefit everyone," she said carefully. "This house is too large for one person to maintain. The proceeds from a sale could provide for your care and still leave a substantial inheritance." "An inheritance you seem eager to access prematurely," I observed. "That's unfair," she protested. "We've been taking care of you, accommodating you in our home." "This is my home," I corrected her quietly, "as the property records clearly show." Silence fell between us, broken only by the sound of the children thundering down the stairs. Vanessa's gaze held mine for a long moment before she turned away. "We'll discuss this later," she muttered. "The kids need breakfast before their activities." "Of course," I agreed. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss everything thoroughly tomorrow, with James present." I excused myself and returned to my attic room to continue my inventory planning. Phase 2 required locating my missing belongings, which I suspected were being stored somewhere on the property. The most logical location would be the detached garage that had once housed my husband's woodworking shop, or possibly the basement storage areas. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Independent. Property assessment complete. Value confirmed at 4.2 Malers given historical designation and current market. Full report being sent to James. Call me after your meeting tomorrow. I texted my acknowledgement, then added the information to my notes. The property was worth significantly more than the 3.2, 3.7 Malers figure in the realtor's email to Vanessa, another piece of information they had either misrepresented or miscalculated. Around midday, I heard the front door open and close as Vanessa took the children to their various activities. Richard's car had left earlier for a golf appointment, according to the casual mention at breakfast. The house was empty. The perfect opportunity to expand my search. I descended from the attic and moved directly to the basement door, which was located off the kitchen. To my surprise, it was locked, an unusual precaution in a family home. I returned to the attic and retrieved a small case from my personal belongings. Inside were various tools I'd kept from my military days, including a set of picks that had once helped me access a locked filing cabinet in Kabul containing critical intelligence. The basement lock was simple and yielded within seconds. I descended the stairs, switching on lights as I went. The basement had been finished during our ownership, divided into a large recreational area, a small bathroom, and 2 storage rooms. I headed directly to the storage areas. The first room contained holiday decorations, off-season sporting equipment, and boxes labeled with the children's names. Nothing unusual. The second room, however, was a different story entirely. As soon as I opened the door, I knew I'd found what I was looking for. The room was filled with furniture and boxes. My furniture and boxes. My oak desk stood against one wall. My filing cabinets were lined up beside it. Stacks of plastic containers labeled in my own handwriting contained the household items, clothing, and personal effects that had disappeared during my transition to the attic room. I methodically opened the filing cabinets first, confirming that all my important documents were still inside. Then I checked several of the boxes, finding my husband's military effects, my formal attire, and the family photo albums I'd carefully maintained over decades. Everything appeared to be present, just hidden away as I had been. I took photographs of the storage room with my phone, documenting the location of each major item. Then I selected several crucial documents from the filing cabinet: the original property deed, my husband's will, our marriage certificate, and my military service record, and placed them in a folder to take upstairs. Before leaving, I noticed a stack of papers on top of one of the boxes. Upon closer inspection, I discovered they were printouts of assisted living facility information, more comprehensive than the spreadsheet I'd found in their digital files. Several facilities had been highlighted and annotated with notes like, affordable, accepts rapid placement, and minimal waiting period. Most telling was a handwritten note from Richard to Vanessa, attached to one brochure. This one's furthest away but cheapest. If we move fast after the doctor signs off, we can have her placed and the house listed by February. I added this document to my folder and carefully relocked the basement door behind me. Back in the attic, I scanned all the documents I'd retrieved and sent the files to both James and Catherine, with a brief explanation of where and how I'd found them. James responded almost immediately. This strengthens our position considerably. Their actions demonstrate a clear pattern of deception and possible elder abuse. We'll address all of this tomorrow. By the time Vanessa returned with the children, I had completed my preparations for the next day's meeting. I spent the evening in my attic room, declining the invitation to join them for dinner, with the excuse that I was tired, a pretense that seemed to relieve Vanessa, who was clearly uncomfortable after our morning conversation. Later that night, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It was Emma, my eldest grandchild, messaging from a friend's phone. "Grandma, Mom and Dad are fighting about you. Dad said they're in big trouble. Mom says you're confused. Are you okay? Do you hate us now? My heart tightened at the message. The children were innocent in this situation, caught in the middle of adult deceptions. I responded carefully. I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Not confused at all. I don't hate anyone, especially not you or your siblings. Your parents and I have some grown-up things to work out about the house and my future. None of this is your fault, and I love you very much. Her reply came quickly. Mom said you might have to move to a special home because you're getting sick like Grandpa did before he died. But you don't seem sick to me. I'm not sick, I assured her. Doctors confirmed that yesterday. I won't be moving anywhere. This has been my home for over 40 years, and I intend to stay right here. There was a pause before her next message appeared. Good. I don't want you to go away. Mom says we can't tell you, but they're fighting about money a lot lately. Dad lost his job but pretends to go to work every day. That's why they want to sell the house. Are you going to make us leave? The information stunned me. Richard's supposed golf appointments and business meetings suddenly made sense in a new and troubling light. Their financial situation was apparently even more dire than I'd realized. No one has to leave, I wrote back. But we all need to. Be honest with each other. Thank you for telling me this. Everything will be clearer after our meeting tomorrow. Try not to worry. K. Love you, Grandma. Love you too, Emma. I set my phone aside, mulling over this new information. Richard's job loss certainly explained the urgency behind their plans. It didn't excuse their deception, but it provided context that would be important for tomorrow's discussion. I made a final note in my planning document. Address families' financial situation, possible solutions that don't involve property sale. Then I closed my laptop and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but also clarity. I had no desire to punish my family despite their actions. What I wanted was respect, honesty, and a solution that preserved both my autonomy and our family bonds if possible. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about Emma's messages. The children saw me clearly, without the distorting lens of greed or convenience that had warped their parents' perspective. In that, at least, there was hope. My last thoughts before sleep claimed me were not of anger or vengeance, but of reconstruction. Like rebuilding a forward operating base after an attack, the goal wasn't merely to restore what had been damaged, but to make it stronger, more secure, and better suited to withstand future challenges. Tomorrow would be the first day of that. Reconstruction, she questioned my competence. I revealed her debt. The morning of the meeting dawned with steel-gray skies and a light snow that dusted the property like powdered sugar. I stood at my attic window, watching the flakes swirl and descend, a silent ballet against the backdrop of bare trees and white grounds. The property had never looked more beautiful or more worth fighting for. I'd been up since 04:30, reviewing my documentation and preparing mentally for the confrontation ahead. Military strategy had taught me that emotional control was as crucial as factual preparation. I would need both today. I dressed with particular care. Charcoal gray slacks, a deep blue cashmere sweater, and the small gold pin on my lapel that signified my rank. No ostentatious jewelry or accessories, nothing that could be interpreted as theatrical or excessive. Just the quiet authority I had earned through decades of service and sacrifice. Downstairs, the atmosphere was tense. Vanessa moved around the kitchen with sharp, agitated movements, checking her phone frequently and exchanging terse whispers with Richard in the adjacent room. The children sensed the tension and were unusually subdued, eating their breakfast in silence before being shepherded off to a neighbor's house for a playdate. "Mom," Vanessa said once the children had gone, her voice overly bright, "about this meeting today, I really think we should discuss things here at home first, just the three of us. There's no need to involve attorneys in family matters." I poured myself a cup of coffee, noting that my hand was perfectly steady while Vanessa's showed a slight tremor. "I disagree," I replied calmly. When family matters extend to property transactions and medical decisions, legal clarity becomes essential. You're making this adversarial, she protested. We only want what's best for you. Then you should welcome the opportunity to discuss all options transparently, with professional guidance, I countered. Richard entered the kitchen, dressed more formally than his usual weekend attire. Vanessa's right, Margaret. This meeting feels unnecessarily confrontational. We've been taking care of you, making plans for your future comfort and security. Without consulting me, I noted. But we can discuss all of that at the meeting. James has reserved a conference room for 2 p.m. We'll drive you, Vanessa said quickly. You shouldn't be navigating downtown on your own. I smiled slightly. Thank you, but I've made my own transportation arrangements. This clearly threw them. They exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke volumes about their assumptions regarding my dependence. What kind of arrangements? Richard asked, poorly concealing his alarm. Professional ones, I replied. The car will arrive at 1:30. Vanessa's face tightened. Mom, we really think it would be better if we went together, as a family. We'll arrive at the same destination, I said. That should be sufficient. The hours before the meeting passed with increasing tension. Vanessa made several phone calls behind closed doors, her voice occasionally rising before she caught herself. Richard disappeared into his home office, my former bedroom, for long stretches, emerging looking increasingly strained. At precisely 1:25 p.m., I descended the stairs with my leather portfolio containing all the documentation I'd gathered. I wore my wool coat and carried my military-issue leather gloves, ready for the winter weather. Vanessa intercepted me at the front door. Mom, wait. Before we do this, I think you should know we've only been trying to help. This house is too much for anyone to manage alone. I appreciate your concern, I said. But I'm not alone, am I? You, Richard, and the children are living here with me. Yes, but, she began, then stopped as a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Who's that? My transportation, I replied, checking my watch. 5 minutes early. Military precision. The driver, another veteran based on his bearing, approached the door and gave me a respectful nod. Colonel Caldwell? Ready when you are, ma'am. Thank you, Sergeant, I replied, recognizing the subtle indicators of his former rank. Vanessa looked between us, clearly unsettled by the exchange and the recognition of my military status. We'll be right behind you, she said. I look forward to seeing you at the meeting, I replied, allowing the driver to escort me to the car. As we pulled away, I glanced back to see Vanessa and Richard standing in the doorway, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. They had grown so accustomed to seeing me as diminished that this simple act of independence had thrown them off balance, exactly as James and I had intended. The law offices were warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the winter chill outside. James's assistant greeted me by name and rank, another small touch that established the tone for what would follow. Colonel Caldwell, Mr. Harrington is expecting you. The conference room is prepared, and Ms. Winters has already arrived. I nodded my thanks and followed her to a spacious corner room with windows overlooking the city. Catherine rose as I entered, greeting me with the particular combination of respect and warmth that exists between veterans who have served together. You're looking well, Maggie, she said, grasping my hand firmly. As are you, Catherine, I replied. Thank you for being here. James entered a moment later, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that belied his 70-plus years. Colonel, glad to see you arrived without incident. Your daughter and son-in-law just checked in downstairs. They'll be up momentarily. Excellent, I said, taking a seat at the conference table. Let's review our approach one final time. James nodded, opening his leather portfolio. We'll begin by establishing the facts of property ownership and your medical status. Then we'll address their financial situation and explore potential solutions that respect your rights while acknowledging family needs. I want to be firm, but not punitive, I reminded him. They're still my family, despite recent actions. Understood, James said, but they need to understand the legal boundaries they've been attempting to cross. The door opened and Vanessa and Richard entered, followed by a third person I didn't immediately recognize, a younger man in a conservative suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "We've asked Brandon Lewis to join us. He's our attorney." I raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course. Please, everyone have a seat." James appeared unperturbed by this development. He had anticipated they might bring legal representation and had prepared accordingly. After brief introductions all around, he took control of the meeting with the ease of someone accustomed to navigating complex negotiations. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here today to discuss several matters concerning Colonel Caldwell's property, living arrangements, and ongoing care. I suggest we begin by establishing some basic facts." He distributed folders to everyone at the table. "These contain copies of the property deed for 1873 Heritage Lane, showing clear title in Colonel Margaret Caldwell's name, with no encumbrances or co-owners. Also included are comprehensive medical evaluations from 2 independent specialists confirming Colonel Caldwell's cognitive competence and physical capability to manage her own affairs." Brandon Lewis, Vanessa's attorney, opened his folder and scanned the documents quickly, his expression carefully neutral. Vanessa and Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable. James continued, "Additionally, you'll find documentation of recent communications between Vanessa and Richard Mercer and various third parties, including real estate agents, financial advisors, and assisted living facilities, all pertaining to plans for the property and Colonel Caldwell's future care, plans made without her knowledge or consent." "Objection," Brandon interjected. "These appear to be private communications obtained without my client's permission." "They were obtained legally," Catherine countered smoothly. "Colonel Caldwell has administrative access to the family email account she established and maintains. The communications occurred on her property, using her internet service, and often concerned her directly." Brandon frowned but didn't pursue the point further. James gestured toward me. "Colonel Caldwell would like to address the situation directly." All eyes turned to me. I sat straight, hands folded calmly on the table before me, the same posture I'd adopted in countless briefing rooms and strategy sessions throughout my military career. "Vanessa, Richard," I began, my voice steady. "I want to start by saying that I understand your financial concerns. Emma mentioned that Richard lost his job some time ago." Richard's face flushed dark red. "She what? We specifically told the children not to be honest with their grandmother?" I finished for him. "Yes, I gathered that deception has become something of a family policy lately." Vanessa leaned forward. "That's not fair, Mom. We were trying to protect you." "By declaring me incompetent based on a single episode of vertigo? By relocating me to the attic while planning to sell my home without my knowledge or consent? By researching affordable assisted living facilities an hour away from my family and community?" I shook my head. "That's not protection, Vanessa. That's exploitation." Brandon attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Colonel Caldwell, my clients were exploring options for your long-term care, given concerns about your health and ability to maintain such a large property. Their intentions were honorable." "Their intentions," I said evenly, "were to solve their financial problems by appropriating my assets. The property they plan to sell has been in my family for 3 generations. The home they relegated me to the attic of is one I purchased with my husband, restored with our own hands, and have maintained for over 40 years. I turned my attention directly to my daughter. "Vanessa, you grew up in this house. You learned to ride a bike on its driveway, built snowmen on its lawn, and celebrated your graduation in its gardens. Yet you were willing to sell it out from under me, based on a medical condition I don't have, to finance a ski lodge in Colorado and cover debts you never disclosed to me. Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes. We were desperate, she whispered. Richard has been out of work for 8 months. The children's private school tuition is behind. The second mortgage on our primary residence is underwater. We didn't know what else to do. You could have asked for help, I said simply. Instead, you attempted to take control of my life and property through deception. Richard, looking defeated, spoke up. The reality is, Margaret, we need somewhere to live. We can't afford our own house anymore. That's why we moved in with you, not just to monitor your health as we claimed. We're facing bankruptcy. This admission hung in the air for a moment. James exchanged a glance with me, then continued with our prepared approach. Colonel Caldwell anticipated this discussion might involve financial concerns, he said. She has asked us to present several potential solutions that respect her rights while addressing family needs. Catherine opened her portfolio and distributed a second set of documents. These outline 3 possible arrangements for your consideration. I watched as Vanessa, Richard, and their attorney reviewed the options we had prepared. The property would remain in my name, with Vanessa and family welcome to continue living there under specified conditions, including appropriate living space. For me in the main house, respect for my authority as property owner, and transparent communication about household and financial matters. A portion of the property could be legally subdivided to create a separate, smaller residence that Vanessa and Richard could purchase from me at a fair but discounted price, allowing them to establish equity while remaining close by. I would retain the property but provide financial assistance to help them stabilize their situation in a separate residence of their choosing, with structured repayment terms and financial counseling requirements. All 3 options, James explained, are contingent upon full financial disclosure from Vanessa and Richard, a formal apology for the deception regarding Colonel Caldwell's health and competence, and legally binding agreements to prevent similar situations in the future. Brandon reviewed the documents carefully. These terms are actually quite generous, considering the circumstances, he admitted, glancing at his clients. Vanessa looked up, her expression a mixture of shame and relief. You're not going to make us leave? After everything we did? You're my daughter, I said simply. The children are my grandchildren. Family doesn't abandon family, even when they've been wronged. Richard shook his head slowly. I don't understand. You have every right to throw us out, to be angry. I am angry, I clarified. But anger is a poor foundation for decision-making. That's something the military teaches you early. I'm interested in solutions, not retribution. We could never afford even the subdivided property, Richard admitted. Our credit is destroyed. Hence the financial counseling requirement, Catherine explained. Colonel Caldwell is willing to help, but not to enable financially unsound decisions. Vanessa wiped tears from her cheeks. Why would you help us at all, after how we treated you? I thought carefully before answering. The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system and the occasional sound of traffic below. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, transforming the city. Because 40 years ago, I finally said, I made a promise to your father before he deployed for the last time. I promised him I would always protect this family and this home. He didn't come back from that deployment, but I've kept my promise. I don't intend to break it now, despite recent events. I leaned forward slightly. But make no mistake, this generosity comes with non-negotiable conditions. I will not be relegated to the attic of my own home. I will not be misrepresented as incompetent to serve someone else's financial agenda. And I will not be excluded from decisions about my property or my future. Brandon conferred quietly with Vanessa and Richard for several minutes. When they turned back to the table, Richard spoke first. We would like to accept the first option, he said formally. Continuing, to live in the main house, under the conditions specified, while we work to rebuild our financial situation, with the understanding Vanessa added, her voice steadier now, that we have seriously breached your trust and have significant amends to make. James looked to me for confirmation, and I nodded. Then we'll draft the formal agreement, he said. In the meantime, Colonel Caldwell will return to her own bedroom in the main house, effective immediately. All her belongings currently in storage will be returned to their proper places. Of course, Vanessa agreed quickly. We'll start as soon as we get home. One last thing, I said as we prepared to conclude the meeting. The children should know the truth. An age-appropriate version, but the truth nonetheless. No more secrets. No more deception. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. Yes, they deserve that. As we rose from the table, Catherine touched my arm lightly. Well done, Colonel, she murmured. A tactical victory without unnecessary casualties. I smiled slightly at the military metaphor. The best kind of victory, I agreed. The drive back to Heritage Lane was quiet, each of us processing what had transpired. My car arrived first, and I waited in the foyer for Vanessa and Richard to join me. When they entered, their expressions were subdued but no longer hostile or defensive. I'll make coffee, Vanessa offered tentatively. Then we can start moving your things back where they belong. I nodded. That would be appropriate. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. Margaret, we owe you an apology. A significant one. Yes, I agreed. You do. But let's start with the practical matters. Apologies mean more when they're backed by actions. As we moved into the kitchen, I noticed the children's artwork on the refrigerator, colorful drawings of what appeared to be Christmas celebrations. One in particular caught my eye. A somewhat lopsided house with multiple figures standing outside, including one gray-haired figure wearing what looked like a military uniform. At the bottom, in Emma's careful handwriting, our family home. Perhaps there was hope for reconciliation after all, not because I was willing to forget, but because I was choosing to rebuild, much as my husband and I had rebuilt this house. Decades ago, with patience, persistence, and a clear vision of what it could become. They had put me in the attic for Christmas, using my age as an excuse and my perceived vulnerability as a tool. But now, as I looked around at the home I had created and maintained, at the property they had failed to check the ownership of before making their plans, I felt not triumph, but resolve. This wasn't the end of our story as a family. It was simply a course correction, one long overdue and necessary for the journey ahead. I reclaimed my bedroom. She rediscovered my medals. The restoration of order began that very evening. After a tense but civil dinner, the first we'd shared together at the dining room table since before Christmas, Vanessa and Richard started the process of returning my bedroom to its original state. The leather office chair was wheeled out, the expensive ergonomic desk dismantled. File boxes and computer equipment migrated upstairs to the attic room that would now become Richard's office. I stood in the doorway, supervising without micromanaging. The military had taught me when to direct and when to observe, when to intervene, and when to allow others to demonstrate their commitment through action. "Where would you like your dresser, Mom?" Vanessa asked, her voice carefully neutral as Richard, and the older children maneuvered the heavy oak piece up from the basement. "Against the east wall, where it's always been," I replied. "The mirror catches the morning light there." She nodded, directing the moving team accordingly. Emma hovered near me, her expression somber and watchful. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you still mad at Mom and Dad?" I considered my answer carefully. Children deserve honesty, but filtered through a lens of compassion. "I was disappointed by their choices," I told her. "But we're working together now to make things right. They said you were sick, but you weren't," she persisted. "They lied." "Yes," I acknowledged. "They did. And that was wrong. But people sometimes make bad decisions when they're scared or desperate. The important thing is what they do afterward, whether they take responsibility and work to repair the damage. Emma absorbed this, her young face serious. Like when I broke Mom's vase and tried to blame Jeremy? Similar, I agreed. And do you remember what happened then? I had to apologize and do extra chores to pay for a new one, she recalled. And it felt better after I told the truth, even though I was in trouble. Exactly. Your parents are in a similar position now. They made mistakes, and now they're working to make amends. I touched her shoulder gently. Part of growing up is learning that adults make mistakes too. The measure of a person isn't whether they're perfect, but how they handle their imperfections. She seemed satisfied with this explanation and moved off to help her brothers carry smaller items from the basement. I watched the family working together, not harmoniously yet, but purposefully. It was a start. By midnight, my bedroom had largely been restored. My bed was reassembled in its proper place beneath the window that overlooked the gardens. My dresser and nightstands were positioned as they had been for decades. My books were returned to the built-in shelves my husband had crafted by hand during his final leave before his last deployment. Your clothes are still in boxes, Vanessa said, exhaustion evident in her voice. We can finish unpacking tomorrow. That's fine, I agreed. You've all worked hard tonight. Richard paused in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. Margaret, I want you to know, he began, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. Yes? I prompted. We never actually read any of your military files or looked through your personal documents, he said finally. We just packed everything away. I want you to know that, at least. It was a small admission, but I recognized it as an attempt at mitigating their actions, establishing some boundary they hadn't crossed, even as they crossed so many others. I appreciate you telling me that, I said, neither accepting nor rejecting his implied partial defense. Good night, Richard. He nodded and withdrew, following Vanessa and the children to their wing of the house. For the first time in months, I closed my bedroom door on a space that was truly mine, imperfectly restored, still showing evidence of its recent conversion, but unmistakably mine once again. I slept soundly that night, better than I had since being relocated to the attic. My military career had accustomed me to sleeping in far less comfortable circumstances, but there was something fundamentally different about resting in a space that acknowledged rather than erased my identity. The next morning, I rose at my usual, early hour and dressed in clothes from the boxes yet to be unpacked. The house was quiet, the family still sleeping after the late night of rearranging. I made coffee and carried a mug out to the greenhouse, which I hadn't properly visited since before Christmas. The space was cold but not freezing, the minimal heating system we'd installed years ago, maintaining just enough warmth to keep the dormant plants alive through winter. My husband's roses, carefully propagated over decades, stood in neat rows, their pruned stems waiting patiently for spring. The work table where he'd taught Vanessa to graft her first cutting was dusty, but intact. The specialized tools hung on their designated hooks, untouched but ready. This greenhouse had been part of Vanessa's subdivision plans, I knew. Lot 3, a prime building site with southern exposure. Standing among the sleeping plants, I felt a renewed determination not just to protect the property but to revitalize it. This wasn't merely about asserting ownership, it was about honoring legacy. I returned to the house as the family was beginning to stir. Vanessa appeared in the kitchen, looking surprised to find me already dressed and active. You're up early, she commented, reaching for the coffee pot. As always, I replied. I visited the greenhouse. The roses have survived the winter well. Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps of another dimension of what she had planned to destroy. Dad's roses, she said softly. I forgot they were still there. 47 varieties, I confirmed, including the yellow climber he named for you when you were born. She busied herself with her coffee, avoiding my gaze. We should continue. Unpacking your things today, she said, changing the subject. The agreement will be ready to sign tomorrow. according to the email Brandon sent last night. Yes, I agreed. James forwarded me the draft. The terms are exactly as we discussed. Richard joined us, dressed in what I recognized as his interview attire, a subtle reminder of the unemployment situation that had partly driven their desperate plan. I have a meeting at 10, he explained, noticing my glance. A former colleague mentioned an opening at his firm. I wish you success, I said sincerely. Their financial stability would benefit everyone, including me. I had no desire to support them indefinitely, only to help them transition to self-sufficiency with their dignity intact. After breakfast, Vanessa and I continued the process of restoring my belongings to their proper places. As we worked, I maintained a professional demeanor, not cold, but not yet warm. Trust, once fractured, requires more than a single day's effort to rebuild. Mom, Vanessa said hesitantly as we unpacked a box of my professional clothes, I found something yesterday when we were moving things that I should have known about before. She left the room briefly and returned carrying a polished wooden case I recognized immediately. My metal display case, custom made by my husband to house, the commendations I'd earned during my military career. I never really looked at these before, she admitted, opening the case carefully. Inside, arranged in precise rows, were the physical representations of my service: the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Meritorious Service Medals, and various campaign medals spanning 3 decades of active duty. You earned all these? She asked, her finger hovering over the Bronze Star with its distinctive V device for valor. Yes, I said simply. I never knew what they meant, she confessed. I saw them on your uniform at ceremonies, but I never asked. The military was my job, not my identity, I explained. When I was home, I wanted to be your mother, not Colonel Caldwell. She picked up the citation that accompanied the Bronze Star, reading it silently. I knew the words by heart. For heroic achievement in connection with combat operations against hostile forces, Colonel Caldwell's quick thinking and decisive leadership saved the lives of 18 service members during an ambush. You never told me, she said, looking up from the document. You never asked, I replied without accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. Vanessa carefully replaced the citation in the case. I think these should be displayed properly, not hidden away in a box. It was a small olive branch, an acknowledgement of the aspects of my identity they had so easily dismissed. I would appreciate that, I said. Your father built a display cabinet in the study specifically for this purpose. I remember now, she said. The glass-fronted cabinet he spent weeks on when I was in high school. We turned it into a liquor cabinet. Yes, I confirmed, my tone neutral. You did. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. We'll restore it, she promised. Today. Throughout the day, more of my belongings emerged from storage. Photo albums, books, the quilt my grandmother had made that had covered my bed for decades, the antique desk clock that had been a retirement gift from my unit. Each item represented a piece of my history that had been casually boxed away, deemed unimportant to the narrative Vanessa and Richard had constructed. The children joined in the restoration effort, asking questions about objects they discovered. What's this, Grandma? Jeremy asked, holding up a tarnished compass in a leather case. That was my field compass, I explained. I carried it through 3 deployments. Does it still work? He wanted to know. Let's find out, I suggested, showing him how to hold it, level, and find true north. His delight in this simple piece of equipment reminded me of Vanessa at a similar age, fascinated by the tools and emblems of my profession. By late afternoon, the formal agreement arrived via courier from James's office. Vanessa, Richard, and I gathered at the dining room table to review it together, without attorneys present. The document formalized the arrangement we had agreed upon. They would continue living in the house with me, with clearly defined spaces and responsibilities, while working to rebuild their financial stability. "This seems fair," Richard acknowledged, turning the pages slowly. "More than fair, actually." "It protects everyone's interests," I noted, including the children's. Vanessa reached the section outlining financial transparency requirements. Monthly, disclosures, mandatory counseling sessions, structured debt repayment plans. "This is extensive," she observed. "Trust is rebuilt through consistency and verification," I replied, echoing a principle that had guided military intelligence operations throughout my career. "The requirements will ease as trust is restored." They signed without further objection, and I added my signature below theirs. The document didn't restore what had been broken between us, but it established a framework within which healing might eventually occur. That evening, as promised, Richard and the boys emptied the converted liquor cabinet and restored it to its original purpose. They carefully cleaned the glass, polished the wood, and reinstalled the specialized mounting hardware my husband had designed. When they finished, Vanessa brought in my metal display case, and together we arranged the commendations, as they had been years before. "Would you tell us about them?" Emma asked, studying the medals with newfound curiosity. "Like, how did you get them? Were you scared?" I looked at my grandchildren's expectant faces, then at Vanessa and Richard, who seemed equally interested, despite their discomfort. This was a part of me they had chosen not to see, had actively worked to diminish. Yet now they were asking to understand. "All right," I agreed, pulling up a chair. "I'll tell you about this one first." I pointed to the bronze star with V device. It was during my second deployment in a small village outside Kandahar. As I recounted the story, edited appropriately for young ears but not sanitized to the point of dishonesty, I watched their faces. The children were rapt, as children tend to be when hearing adventure stories. But it was Vanessa's expression that caught my attention, a slow dawning of recognition, as though she were seeing a dimension of her mother she had never fully acknowledged before. "You saved all those people," Jeremy said when I finished, his voice filled with awe. "I did my job," I corrected gently. "As did every member of my unit. The medal represents our collective effort, not just mine." "But you were in charge," Emma persisted. "You made the decisions." "Yes," I acknowledged. "I did. Leadership means taking responsibility for those decisions, whether they succeed or fail." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps hearing the unspoken parallel to our current situation. He had made decisions that affected our entire family, decisions that had nearly cost us all dearly, yet had been unwilling to take responsibility until forced to do so. "Tell us another one," Jeremy urged. I shook my head. "That's enough for tonight. The rest can wait for another time." As the children dispersed to complete homework and prepare for bed, Vanessa lingered by the display cabinet, studying the medals with a new intensity. "I never really thought about what these meant," she admitted quietly. "What you'd seen, what you'd done. It was always just Mom's job, Mom's uniform, Mom's going away again." It wasn't easy for any of us, I acknowledged. The separations were difficult. "But you always came back," she said, her voice catching slightly. "You always kept your promises." "Yes," I agreed. "I did." She turned to face me fully, her expression more open than it had been in months. "I'm sorry, Mom, not just for the recent deception, but for not seeing you clearly for so long, for reducing you to just a solution to our problems." It was the most genuine apology she'd offered yet, not excusing or minimizing, but acknowledging the fundamental disrespect that had underlain their actions. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means something." Later that night, as I prepared for bed in my restored room, I heard a soft knock at the door. When I opened it, I found a small package wrapped in plain paper on the floor, with a note in Vanessa's handwriting. Found this in the attic. Thought it should be returned. I unwrapped the package to find my husband's dog tags, the extra set he'd given me before his final deployment, the ones I'd thought lost years ago during one of the family's helpful reorganizing efforts. I held the metal tags in my palm, feeling their familiar weight and texture. Robert James Caldwell, service number, blood type, religious preference. The fundamental identifiers of a soldier, reduced to stamped metal. That she had found them, or perhaps had them all along, and chosen this moment to return them felt significant. Not a grand gesture, but a small recognition of what had been. Important to me, what had shaped me. I placed the dog tags on my nightstand beside the photograph of Robert and me in uniform, standing before this house on the day we purchased it. Two soldiers who had built something meant to last, something worth defending. In the quiet of my reclaimed space, I allowed myself to acknowledge the complex emotions of the past few days, the anger at the betrayal, the hurt at being so fundamentally misunderstood by my own child, the determination to stand my ground, and now, the cautious hope that something salvageable remained in the wreckage of assumptions and deceptions. They had put me in the attic for Christmas, dismissing decades of command experience and personal autonomy because it suited their narrative of decline and dependence. But they had failed to check the property records, failed to confirm their assumptions, failed to recognize that the strategic thinking I'd employed throughout my military career hadn't diminished with retirement. Now we were engaged in a different kind of campaign, one aimed at reconstruction rather than victory, at understanding rather than surrender. Whether we would succeed remained to be seen. But tonight, with my medals properly displayed and my husband's dog tags returned, it felt as though we had established a beachhead from which to advance. I turned out the light and slept in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house. Not as a guest granted space by grudging children, but as the owner and steward of a legacy I had earned through service, sacrifice, and the quiet persistence that had defined my life both in and out of uniform. They noticed the will. I noticed their effort. The transition back to normalcy, or rather to a new equilibrium, progressed gradually over the weeks following our formal agreement. January brought bitter cold, frequent snowstorms, and the quiet introspection that often accompanies winter's stillness. The forced proximity of weather-bound days created both challenges and opportunities as we navigated our reconfigured family dynamics. Richard's job search continued with mixed results. Several promising interviews, but no offers yet. I observed his growing frustration without comment, recognizing the particular wound to pride that accompanies professional rejection. My military career had taught me that sometimes the most effective support is silent presence, rather than persistent questioning. Vanessa had returned to her position at the marketing firm where she'd worked for the past 5 years. Though I noticed, she no longer stayed late at the office or brought work home on weekends. Whether this represented a shift in priorities or simply acknowledgement of our new household arrangement, I couldn't say with certainty. The children adapted most quickly, as children often do. Once the initial awkwardness passed, they seemed to accept the new reality with remarkable flexibility. Emma, in particular, had taken to spending evenings in my room, completing homework at the small desk in the corner while asking occasional questions about my military photographs or the books on my shelves. "Grandma," she said one evening as snow fell steadily outside, "did you always want to be a soldier?" I looked up from the book I was reading. "No, not always. When I was your age, I wanted to be a doctor." "What changed your mind?" I considered how to explain the complex interplay of opportunity, circumstance, and choice that shapes a life's direction. I joined ROTC in college to help pay for my education. I planned to serve my required years and then pursue medical school. But I discovered I had an aptitude for military work, particularly intelligence operations. And I found meaning in it, a sense of purpose that I hadn't expected. Do you regret not becoming a doctor? No, I said honestly. I became a physician's assistant during part of my service, so I still used my interest in medicine. But more importantly, I found my true calling. Sometimes the path you don't plan is the one that suits you best. She nodded thoughtfully, returning to her mathematics homework. After a few minutes, she spoke again. Mom says you saved a lot of people during your war. I helped protect my fellow soldiers, I corrected gently. That was my job. She never talked about your medals before, Emma persisted. But yesterday, when Mrs. Hernandez came over, she showed her your display cabinet and told her you were a hero. This surprised me. Vanessa had rarely expressed interest in my military accomplishments, much less pride. The revelation that she was now sharing this aspect of my identity with others represented a shift I hadn't anticipated. Interesting, I said neutrally. Is it true you jumped out of helicopters? Emma asked, clearly having heard snippets of conversation not meant for her ears. I smiled slightly. On occasion, yes, when necessary. Her eyes widened. That's so cool. It was also terrifying, I admitted. Courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear. She absorbed this idea silently, then returned to her homework with renewed concentration. I watched her for a moment. Her serious expression, the methodical way she approached each problem, and saw echoes of myself at that age. Determined, analytical, quietly observant. The next morning, I rose early as usual and made my way to the kitchen to start coffee. To my surprise, Richard was already there, dressed in a suit and tie despite the early hour. Margaret, he acknowledged, seeming slightly startled by my appearance. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some. Thank you, I said, reaching for a mug. You're up early. Final interview with Westridge Partners, he explained. 8 a.m. start time. I nodded. Westridge was a respected financial consulting firm, smaller than his previous employer, but with a solid reputation. I wish you success, I said sincerely. He hesitated, then spoke with unexpected candor. I appreciate that, especially given everything. Your employment benefits all of us, I pointed out. Professional stability is important for more than just financial reasons. He nodded, understanding the layers in my statement. The routine and purpose provided by meaningful work were as essential as the paycheck, particularly for someone whose sense of identity had been shaken by job loss. I've been meaning to say, he began awkwardly, the medallion display in the study, it looks right there, the way it should. I never should have. He trailed off, unable to directly acknowledge the disrespect inherent in converting my medal display into a liquor cabinet. No, I agreed simply. You shouldn't have. He accepted this without defensiveness, a small but notable change from his previous attitude. If I get this position, he said, changing the subject, we should be able to start repaying you within the month, for the loan to cover the kids' tuition. Follow the schedule outlined in the agreement, I advised. No more, no less. Rebuilding. Financial stability requires consistency, not grand gestures. He nodded, finishing his coffee and checking his watch. I should go. Don't want to risk being late with this weather. After he left, I moved through my morning routine with the discipline ingrained by decades of military service. Physical therapy exercises to maintain mobility in my shoulder, where shrapnel from an IED had caused permanent damage. 20 minutes of reading current events to stay informed. A light breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. I was reviewing household accounts at the dining room table when Vanessa emerged, dressed for work, but moving with the slightly disorganized energy of someone running behind schedule. Mom, she acknowledged, pouring coffee into a travel mug. Did Richard already leave? About 40 minutes ago, I confirmed. Final interview at Westridge. She nodded distractedly. Right. I forgot that was today. She glanced at the papers, spread before me. What are you working on? Household budget reconciliation, I replied. The heating bill was higher than projected for December. Vanessa paused in her morning rush, her expression turning cautious. We can adjust the thermostat. Settings if needed. The kids might complain, but that won't be necessary, I interjected. The variance is within acceptable limits. I'm simply updating the projections for January and February based on the actual December usage. Oh. She seemed momentarily nonplussed by this practical approach. That's good. I continued my calculations as she gathered her things for work. Just before leaving, she hesitated by the dining room doorway. Mom, I was thinking, would it be all right if we use the greenhouse this weekend? Emma's science class is doing a unit on plant propagation, and I thought maybe you could show her how to take cuttings from Grandpa's roses. The request took me by surprise. Not just the acknowledgement of my expertise in this area, but the initiative to include me in her daughter's education. That would be fine, I said, maintaining my composure despite the unexpected warmth the request generated. The yellow Charlotte variety would be most suitable for a beginner. It roots easily. Vanessa nodded. Great. She'll be excited. She's been talking about those roses ever since you mentioned them. After she left, I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the subtle shifts occurring in our household. The formal agreement had established boundaries and expectations, but these small, voluntary inclusions, Vanessa showing my medals to her friend, Richard acknowledging the propriety of their proper display, this invitation to share my knowledge of horticulture with Emma, were perhaps more meaningful than the legal document we had signed. Later that afternoon, while organizing papers in my study, I came across a folder I hadn't seen in some time, my estate planning documents. I opened it, reviewing the contents with a critical eye. The will had last been updated 3 years ago, shortly after Richard and Vanessa had purchased their now underwater property. It left the Heritage Lane estate to Vanessa upon my death, with provisions for the care and maintenance of specific elements, including the greenhouse and gardens. Given recent events, prudence suggested a review of these arrangements might be warranted. I made a note to contact James about potential revisions, not out of vindictiveness, but out of responsible stewardship. Trust had been significantly compromised, and legal safeguards might be necessary to ensure my wishes were respected after my death. I was still reviewing the documents when Emma returned from school, bursting through the front door with the exuberance, unique to 11-year-olds released from academic confinement. "Grandma!" she called, finding me in the study. "Mom said we're going to use the greenhouse this weekend. Can we start today? Please?" I smiled at her enthusiasm. "The weekend will be better for taking cuttings, but we could visit the greenhouse today to prepare the propagation materials if you'd like." "Yes," she agreed immediately, already shedding her backpack and coat. "Homework first," I reminded her. She sighed dramatically, but complied, setting up her books at the study table while I continued my review of the estate documents. I noticed her glancing occasionally at the papers before me, curiosity evident in her expression. "What are those?" she finally asked, unable to contain her interest any longer. "Estate planning documents," I answered honestly. "Instructions for what happens to my property after I'm gone." "Like a will?" she asked, surprising me with her familiarity with the term. "Yes, exactly like a will." She considered this for a moment. "Mom and Dad were fighting about a will before Christmas. I heard them when they thought I was asleep." I kept my expression neutral, though this confirmation of their pre-holiday scheming was hardly surprising. "Were they?" Emma nodded. "Dad kept saying they needed to check something about a will before they could move forward with their plans. Mom said you would never change it, because you always kept your promises." She mimicked Vanessa's voice with uncanny accuracy. "Your mother was correct about that," I said evenly. "I do keep my promises." Emma returned to her homework, apparently satisfied with this exchange. I, however, found myself reflecting on this new piece of information. They had discussed my will, had worried about whether I might change it. but hadn't taken the elementary step of checking the property records. It was a telling oversight, revealing both their presumption and their carelessness. That evening, Richard returned from his interview looking cautiously optimistic. "It went well," he reported during dinner. "They seemed impressed with my client, management experience. They've asked me to come back tomorrow to meet with the senior partners." "That's wonderful, Dad," Emma exclaimed. "Good job," Jeremy added, less effusive but genuine. Vanessa reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "That's promising." I nodded my agreement. Second interviews with senior leadership usually indicate serious interest. The dinner conversation continued with a lightness that had been absent in recent weeks. The children shared school news. Vanessa mentioned a successful presentation at work, and Richard elaborated on the potential position at Westridge. I observed the interactions with quiet attention, noting the reduced tension, the absence of the strained politeness that had characterized our early post-confrontation meals. After dinner, as I helped Vanessa clear the table, a shared task we had established in our new household arrangement, she spoke unexpectedly. "I saw you were reviewing your will today," she said, her tone carefully casual. "Emma mentioned it. I placed dishes in the dishwasher with methodical precision." "Yes, regular review of legal documents is a prudent practice." She hesitated, then asked directly, "Are you planning to change it?" I straightened and met her gaze. "I'm considering adjustments to ensure my wishes are properly executed. Recent events have highlighted certain vulnerabilities in the current arrangements." Her face flushed slightly, but she didn't look away. "I understand why you would reconsider. We betrayed your trust." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." "For what it's worth," she continued, "I was wrong. Not just about the deception, but about you. I convinced myself you were declining because it was convenient for our plans. I ignored evidence to the contrary because it didn't fit the narrative I needed." It was the most direct acknowledgement she had offered of the fundamental disrespect that had underlain their actions, not just the attempt to appropriate my property, but the willful mischaracterization of my capabilities and agency. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "Recognition of the problem is the first step toward addressing it." "Are you going to remove me from the will entirely?" she asked, the question clearly difficult for her to voice. I considered my response carefully. "No, this property has been in our family for generations. I intend to maintain that continuity, but I am considering additional legal structures to prevent premature disposal or subdivision of the estate." Relief crossed her features, followed by a more sober expression. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." We finished cleaning the kitchen in companionable silence. As we were about to part ways for the evening, Vanessa spoke again. "Emma is really looking forward to working in the greenhouse with you. She's never shown much interest in gardening before." "Sometimes interest skips a generation," I observed. "Your father would be pleased to see the roses continuing." Vanessa's expression softened at the mention of her father. "I remember how patient he was teaching me to take cuttings. I was terrible at it, kept cutting at the wrong angle, forgetting to remove the lower leaves. But he never got frustrated. He believed in learning through doing," I said, "even when it meant sacrificing a few good stems." "You were always more precise in your instructions," she recalled, a small smile playing at her lips. "Step by step, no deviation from procedure." "Different approaches to the same goal," I acknowledged. "Military precision versus his more intuitive gardening style." "Between the two of you, something always managed to grow," Vanessa said, a metaphor that seemed to extend beyond horticulture to my parenting partnership with her father. I nodded, accepting both the literal and figurative truth of her statement. Yes, something always grew. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself contemplating the day's developments. The small gestures of respect and inclusion, Emma's inadvertent revelation about their pre-Christmas discussions, Vanessa's direct acknowledgement of her wrongdoing, the plans for greenhouse activities over the weekend. Each represented a minor recalibration in our family system, a gradual shift toward a more balanced and honest relationship. Not the automatic trust and affection that had existed before their deception, but something potentially more durable because it acknowledged past failures rather than pretending they hadn't occurred. I picked up the folder containing my will and estate documents, considering the adjustments I would discuss with James. Not punitive changes, but protective ones. Structures that would ensure the property remained intact for future generations, while still acknowledging Vanessa as my heir. Trust, once fractured, requires more than apologies to rebuild. It requires consistent behavior over time, demonstrated respect, and sometimes additional safeguards to prevent future breaches. This was true in military operations, and it was equally true in family relationships. They had put me in the attic at Christmas, believing they could manage me into compliance with their plans. They had noticed my will existed but hadn't verified the property ownership that would have revealed the fundamental flaw in their strategy. Now, as winter deepened outside our windows, we were engaged in a different kind of campaign. Not the rapid tactical maneuvers of our confrontation, but the slower, more deliberate process of reconstruction. I placed the folder on my nightstand and turned out the light, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house settling around me. The property had weathered many storms in its long history, architectural, environmental, and now interpersonal. Like the yellow Charlotte roses we would propagate this weekend, it had proven remarkably resilient. So had I. Spring arrived with quiet persistence. The snow retreated gradually, revealing the dormant gardens and awakening the yellow Charlotte roses in the greenhouse. 6 months had passed since that Christmas when they relegated me to the attic, believing they could erase me from my own story. The formal signing of my revised estate documents took place on a mild April morning. James had helped me craft a trust that would protect the property while still honoring family legacy. Vanessa and Richard sat beside me in the attorney's office, their expressions solemn but not resentful as James explained the new arrangements. The property will transfer to a family trust upon your death, he clarified. Vanessa will serve as trustee, but with specific provisions preventing sale or subdivision for 25 years. The main house must remain as a single-family residence, the greenhouse and gardens must be maintained according to established standards, and the colonel's military memorabilia must remain displayed in the study. Richard nodded his understanding. These terms preserve Margaret's wishes while still allowing us to live there. It's reasonable. More than reasonable, Vanessa added quietly. I signed the documents with steady hands, then passed the pen to Vanessa. As she added her signature acknowledging the terms, I noticed the absence of tension in her shoulders. The defensive posture she had maintained during our initial confrontation months ago had finally dissolved. The new documents also include educational trusts for the grandchildren, James continued, and provisions for Richard's new business venture, should you choose to pursue it. This addition had been my own initiative, crafted after Richard had secured a position at Westridge Partners and subsequently identified an opportunity to launch a specialized financial consulting practice focusing on veteran-owned businesses. It was a sector he understood through our recent experiences and one that aligned with my own values. That's unexpected, Richard admitted, clearly surprised by this extension of support. Calculated risk management, I corrected, unwilling to frame it as pure generosity. Veterans represent an underserved market with significant growth potential. Your recent experiences with financial recovery give you credibility in this area. He understood my meaning. His own financial missteps had provided painful but valuable insights that could benefit others. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Margaret. After leaving James's office, we walked together through the downtown area, passing a military surplus store with recruitment posters in the window. Emma, who had accompanied us and waited in the reception area during the signing, stopped to study a poster showing a female soldier operating communications equipment. "Grandma, were there many women in the Army when you joined?" she asked. "Not as many as now," I replied, "but enough that I never felt entirely alone." "I think I might want to join someday," she said thoughtfully. "Not to fight, but maybe to do something with computers or intelligence like you did." Vanessa's expression flickered with momentary alarm, but to her credit, she didn't discourage this nascent ambition. Instead, she placed a hand lightly on Emma's shoulder. "You've got time to explore lots of possibilities," she said neutrally. "And Grandma would be a good person to talk to about what military service really involves." It was a small moment, but significant. An acknowledgement of my experience as valuable rather than irrelevant. A recognition that my past could inform her daughter's future. Later that evening, the family gathered in the greenhouse where spring planting was well underway. Emma had proven to have her grandfather's touch with the roses, demonstrating natural aptitude for the delicate work of propagation. Jeremy showed more interest in the structural aspects, helping me repair irrigation systems and reinforce shelving. "Colonel," Richard said, using my rank for the first time without irony or defensiveness, "Emma and I found something in the attic you might want to see." He handed me a dusty wooden box I recognized immediately. My husband's field writing desk, a portable campaign piece that had accompanied him through multiple deployments. I had thought it lost during one of our many moves. "Where did you find this?" I asked, running my fingers over the worn surface. "Behind some old trunks," Emma explained. "Dad and I were organizing the space to make his office better, and we found it pushed way back under the eaves." I opened the box carefully. Inside were my husband's field journals, his tactical pen still clipped to the last partially filled notebook. His handwriting covered the pages, observations, sketches, occasional personal reflections from his final deployment. "Thank you," I said simply, closing the box gently. "This is significant." Richard nodded, understanding. "We thought it might be." That night, after the household had settled into evening routines, I sat in my bedroom reading my husband's journal by lamplight. His voice emerged from the pages, pragmatic and thoughtful, occasionally humorous in the wry way of soldiers facing difficult circumstances. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his death, caught my attention. Margaret would appreciate. The gardens here, vibrant despite everything, roses climbing stone walls that have seen a century of conflict, resilience in unlikely places, like her. Made arrangements to transfer property titles solely to her name before deployment. Better protection if something happens. She'll keep it intact, maintain what matters. Always does. 2 more months, then home to those yellow roses she pretends not to fuss over when I'm gone. Home to my colonel who leads with quiet certainty. Home. I closed the journal, unexpectedly moved by this glimpse into his thoughts, this confirmation that he had understood me so completely, my dedication to preservation, my commitment to stewardship, my determination to protect what mattered. He had known to place the property solely in my name, a decision that had ultimately protected it from his daughter's misguided plans. He had recognized my strength long before I had needed to demonstrate it so dramatically. A soft knock interrupted my reflections. Vanessa stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. "May I come?" "In?" she asked. I nodded, accepting the offered cup. "Thank you." She settled in the chair opposite mine, her gaze falling on the journal in my lap. "Dad's?" "Yes," I confirmed. "His last deployment." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke with evident effort. "I've been thinking about Christmas, about what we did. I don't think I've properly apologized. Not really. I've acknowledged it was wrong, but I haven't said I'm sorry." She met my gaze directly. "I am sorry, Mom. Deeply sorry." I considered her words, testing them for sincerity, and finding them genuine. "Apology accepted," I said simply. "We put you in the attic," she continued. "But you had always kept us grounded. The irony of that isn't lost on me now." "We all lost perspective," I allowed. "You in believing I had diminished to the point of irrelevance. Me in not recognizing the financial desperation driving your actions. Still, there's no excuse for what we planned." "No," I agreed. "There isn't. But there is a path forward." "Which we're already walking," she smiled slightly. "Military precision, even in reconciliation." "Some habits serve in all contexts," I acknowledged. As she left, I returned to my husband's journal, to his confidence in my ability to preserve what mattered, not just the property, but the values and legacy it represented. He had entrusted me with this responsibility, and despite the unexpected challenges, I had fulfilled it. They had put me in the attic, not knowing I owned the entire property. But ownership, I had come to realize, was about more than legal documents and property rights. It was about claiming your place, standing your ground, and rebuilding what others attempt to dismantle, whether that's a greenhouse, a family relationship, or your own sense of dignity. 6 months after that Christmas confrontation, we had established a new equilibrium. Not perfect, not without occasional tension, but fundamentally sound, like a well-designed tactical plan, adaptable to changing conditions while maintaining clear objectives. The property remained in my name, protected by new legal structures. For future generations, the family remained under one roof, navigating our shared space with greater awareness and respect. My military history was acknowledged rather than erased, my autonomy recognized rather than undermined. Most importantly, the truth had emerged from the shadows of convenient deception, creating a foundation more stable than the comfortable fictions that had preceded our confrontation. They had put me in the attic, believing me diminished. I had reclaimed my proper place, knowing myself intact. That's the thing about veterans. We don't retreat. We regroup, reassess, and re-engage with clearer purpose. If you've enjoyed this story of reclaiming what's rightfully yours, of standing your ground with dignity rather than vengeance, please subscribe to my channel for more tales of quiet resilience and strategic recovery. Leave a comment sharing your own experiences with family challenges and how you navigated them. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't loud confrontation, but calm, documented determination. Like, subscribe, and join me next week for another story of unexpected strength in unlikely circumstances.